war in Ukraine is entering a darker chapter. From the front lines to the heart of the barracks, Russian missiles now reach into places once thought safe. Soldiers, trained to fight, caught in the open, running for their lives. Some will never rise again, others scarred and shaken. But this strike is not just another tragedy of war, it's a warning. The world's most powerful leaders prepare to meet and decide Ukraine's fate without Ukraine in the room. At least one person was killed and several others were injured in a Russian missile strike on a training unit of the Ukrainian Land Forces. Meanwhile, ahead of talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump aimed at negotiating an end to the war, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that Moscow cannot be trusted and is planning new offensives. According to a report by Ukrinform.net, the personnel were alerted immediately after receiving a missile danger signal. Despite the security measures taken, a group of soldiers was caught in the strike zone of cluster munitions while moving to shelters and bunkers, the report added. One person is reported to have been killed and 11 wounded with injuries of varying severity. Another 12 soldiers sought medical attention with complaints of post-concussion syndrome and acute stress reaction. The wounded are receiving all necessary medical assistance, the Ukraine military said in a statement.
Despite taking security measures, a group of servicemen entered an area under fire from cluster munitions while moving to specially equipped shelters and bunkers. One fatality and 11 wounded with injuries of varying severity have been confirmed. Another 12 servicemen sought medical treatment, complaining of acoustic trauma and acute stress reaction. All the affected personnel received medical treatment, and that all the appropriate services are working at the scene.
According to the Ukrainian military, an air raid warning was issued in Kyiv and several oblasts due to the threat of Russian ballistic missile launches. Ukraine's air forces also reported high-speed aerial assets in the east of Chernihiv Oblast moving westwards, and later noted that the object is moving further from Nizhyn towards the settlement of Desna. Separately, the New York Times reported that at least a dozen foreign volunteers serving in Ukraine's military were killed late last month when a Russian missile struck a training camp's mess hall during lunchtime, one of the deadliest attacks on foreign fighters since the start of the war. Citing soldiers with knowledge of the incident, the New York Times said the strike occurred on July 21, 2025, near the central Ukrainian city of Kropivnitsky. The Ukrainian army confirmed that soldiers had been killed and wounded, but declined to disclose details. 3 soldiers, including one who witnessed the strike, told NYT that the missile hit just as recruits from the United States, Colombia, Taiwan, Denmark, and other countries sat down at picnic tables for lunch. Meanwhile, an American recruit from Florida, who asked not to be identified, said in a telephone interview with NYT,
"The explosion was the loudest he had ever heard." In a telephone interview, he said the blast had sent debris flying around him and had shaken nearby trees. After the explosion, dead and dismembered bodies and gravely wounded soldiers were lying on the ground near the mess hall. At least 15 dead soldiers and more than 100 others who were wounded.
He also noted that the base's air raid alarm did not sound before the strike and that first aid kits were nowhere to be found around the mess hall. A spokesman for the International Legion under Ukraine's military intelligence agency, HEUR, Volodymyr Kaminsky, told the NYT that an investigation was underway and that the toll could not be revealed while it continued. Foreigners serve in regular Ukrainian army units or in 2 dedicated international legions, one subordinate to the army, the other to HEUR. Early in the war, many foreign fighters were veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, inspired by Ukraine's resistance to Russia's invasion. More recently, recruits have come from South America, particularly Colombia, drawn by higher salaries despite severe frontline risks. Hundreds of foreigners have passed through Camp Krop, the HEUR training site where last month's strike occurred. 2 foreign soldiers told NYT that lax security had long been a concern at the camp, with communal mealtimes seen as dangerous. The war's reach continues to deepen, even as Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to meet US President Donald Trump in Alaska later this week to discuss possible steps toward ending the conflict. Meanwhile, ahead of talks, Ukraine has warned that Moscow cannot be trusted and is planning new offensives. In his evening address, citing a report from Ukraine's intelligence, Zelensky said intelligence and military officials had briefed him on August 11th.
Today, there was also a report from the Intelligence and Military Command on what Putin is counting on and what he is actually preparing for, including military preparations. He is definitely not preparing for a ceasefire or an end to the war. Putin is determined only to present a meeting with America as his personal victory, and then continue acting exactly as before, applying the same pressure on Ukraine as before. So far, there is no indication whatsoever that the Russians have received signals to prepare for a post-war situation. On the contrary, they are moving their troops and forces in such a way as to launch new offensive operations. If someone is preparing for peace, this is not what he does. We continue to keep our partners informed about the real situation on the battlefield, in diplomacy, and in Russia's planning of further actions.
The problem for Ukraine is whether anyone is listening. Neither Zelensky nor European officials have been invited to the Trump-Putin talks in Alaska on August 15th, much to their consternation. Kaja Kallas, the European Union's foreign policy chief, echoed Zelensky's concerns, telling CNBC that Putin was just pretending to negotiate in an effort to avoid Trump's threat of further sanctions if a ceasefire is not reached.
In order for any deal to be implemented, you need Europe and you need Ukraine. So it is clear that Putin is just pretending to negotiate. Otherwise, Ukraine would be at that table. He just wants to postpone the sanctions. And that's why he's playing this game.
Claiming that Putin just wants to have a picture with President Trump, Kallas said Russia had shown little appetite for peace.
It is clear that Putin just wants concessions, yet they have offered none before even discussing territory. We should first be talking about a ceasefire. Ukraine agreed to an unconditional ceasefire 5 months ago, and since then, Putin and the Kremlin have just been playing games. We should really be putting pressure on Russia.